These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Book Club. Today we're reading from Point to Point Navigation, a memoir by Gore Vidal. This is from the last two chapters, and we're reading from page 258. In 1961, a new president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated at the age of 43. With him, a new generation had taken the crown from the older generation as represented by General Eisenhower. There was triumphant talk of a new frontier, presumably to be crossed by all of us into a bright new land where the only shadow that marred the prospect was that of the hideous, murderous specter of international communism centered upon the Soviet Union, against whom JFK had sworn to bear any burden to ensure the ultimate victory of freedom, liberty, and so on. But early on, starting in 1959, under the general direction of then Vice President Richard Nixon, who had many interesting Cuban mob connections. Yes, Bibi Rebozo, his mysterious friend, was also linked not only to mobsters, but to the Cuban dictator Batista, who had been overthrown by Fidel Castro, to the annoyance of the mob, an annoyance that turned to fury when Castro shut down, if only briefly, the mafia-run Havana casinos. Elements of the CIA were soon attempting to murder Castro, who, like all Nixon enemies, was, if not yet a communist, worst, a communist dupe. The presidential election of 1960 was a close one, fought by Nixon and John Kennedy, an attractive Massachusetts senator whose father had, ironically, dealings with many mobsters during the pre-World War II period, as well as at the time of the prohibition of alcohol. The late film producer Ray Stark told me how, during the short presidency of JFK, Joe Kennedy and Frank Costello, the retired New York mob overlord, would often have dinner at Kennedy's Central Park South apartment and rehash old crimes, often in the country of a retired teamster who gave great massages. Joe's mob connections were useful to Jack in the 1960 election and could easily have saved JFK's life in 1963 had Bobby Kennedy, in the interest of building himself up in the public eyes, not started arresting important mobsters, particularly in the so-called Appalachian Mob Conference, bust, where they had all come together to confer about the secession of the leadership of the New York mob. I've long since forgotten how I first heard of the plot to kill JFK, while I had no idea at all of the Kennedy brothers' plot to kill Castro on December 1st, 1963, until I read a recent book by Lamar Waldron and Thom Hartmann called Ultimate Sacrifice. It was assumed that the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62 had sufficiently alarmed JFK and Castro's mentor Khrushchev so that they jointly backed down, putting an end, so everyone thought, to such dangerous adventures. JFK had pledged not to invade Cuba if Castro would allow inspections of any remaining missiles on the island. Since Castro did not cooperate, JFK then regarded his pledge as inoperative. In the spring of 1963, according to Ultimate Sacrifice, more a literal than an ironic title, John and Robert Kennedy started laying the groundwork for a coup against Fidel Castro that would eventually be set for what they called C-Day, December 1st, 1963. Bobby, like Nixon before him, was in charge of what would be the most secretive operation of its sort in our history. Since the CIA had, in the eyes of the Kennedys, botched the 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, the Department of Defense was to be in charge of this adventure, which would first engage mob hitmen to assassinate Castro and then replace Castro with a provisional government that would implore the United States to come to its aid and restore order. Ours is a society riddled with plots of every kind, from, let's say, one to bribe certain members of Congress to cheat Indians off of their casino money, to the financing, often secretly, of numerous presidential elections, while simultaneously great companies like Enron cheat customers, stockholders, and employees. Yet everyone who draws attention to all of this corruption is quickly denounced as a conspiracy theorist who means to undo the great fiction that anything truly wicked, at least in the murder line, must be the work of a solitary lone nut who is simply evil. Hence the setting up of Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone crazed killer of JFK, despite his own brief but presumably accurate statement after his Dallas arrest, "I'm the patsy." Then, as planned, his being gunned down by Jack Ruby, a fellow CIA asset. Oswald as lone killer for no reason at all, and addled Ruby, a one-time Chicago mobster who claimed to be deeply worried about the stress all this must be causing the widow Kennedy. And he goes on in chapter 55. Ultimate Sacrifice describes how the Kennedy C-Day plan was penetrated by three mafia godfathers: Carlos Marcello, New Orleans; Santo Trafficante, Tampa, Florida; and Johnny Roselli out of Chicago. All three were being vigorously pursued by Attorney General Robert Kennedy, along with a dozen of their associates, of whom 6 were also working on the Castro murder case. The crime bosses then used parts of the C-Plan, a.k.a. AM World, to arrange JFK's assassination in a way that would prevent a thorough government investigation in order to protect the coup plan, its participants, as well as, naturally, national security by invoking the secrecy surrounding the C-Plan. The mob bosses targeted JFK twice before Dallas, once in Chicago on November 2nd, JFK called off his motorcade, and then in Tampa on November 18th. He survived unscathed. Ultimate Sacrifice reveals and details why Robert Kennedy later told several close associates the name of the godfather, Carlos Marcello, who had ordered his brother killed. But he couldn't do anything about it for fear the Soviets might go to war. Ironic and tragic action. I recalled when over the years I'd asked why what happened at Dallas happened, I'd answer, because Bobby had broken a truce made with the mob by Joe Kennedy in 1960. The book, Point-to-Point Navigation by Gore Vidal.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. Thanksgiving week here is upon us. And the Republican cult just keeps rolling along. I will share my thoughts in a rant about that with you in about 15 minutes. The second hour of our program today, the entire second hour, will be the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Ro Khanna of California, taking your calls for the hour. He's becoming a real progressive superstar in the House of Representatives. And in our third hour, the entire hour, we're going to have an hour-long conversation with Dr. Jack Bratich. Everything you ever wanted to know, and maybe even didn't want to know, but really should know about the Q Anon conspiracy and the whole cult and all that stuff around it. But to start off this hour of this program, our old buddy Greg Palast is on the line with us, the investigative journalist, the author, his latest book, How Trump Stole 2020, something that is still up in the air. Jeez. His website, gregpalast.com. You can tweet him at Greg_Palast. Greg, welcome back to the program. I understand there's some new goings-on down in Georgia. Tell us about it.
Oh, my God, the smell of audacity. The Secretary of State has proposed a new rule to stop voter fraud. You know all the voter fraud that they've found in Georgia, but this is really serious stuff. He stuck in a rule, I kid you not, at midnight last night, Georgia time, with an emergency hearing this morning of the Board of Elections to stop, to prevent people from coming into Georgia and voting in the Senate runoff, which is, of course, going to decide everyone's Senate. Now, how are they going to catch these fraudsters? Well, they're going to prevent anyone, any county official and any elections official in any of the 159 counties can stop anyone from registering. Ready? If you don't have a car registered in Georgia. Now, needing to buy a car to vote, Tom, that's kind of a heavy poll tax. So they can't actually stop you from voting or registering, but they can withhold your registration till they give you a hearing to confirm that you're a Georgian. This is no joke, by the way. They actually pulled this on my daughter.
And the hearings will happen, no doubt, after the hearings will happen, no doute, after the election, right?
Yes. Now, understand. That's right. It'll happen after the January 5 election. So understand who's going to be hit here. We are going through a massive registration, re-registration drive, working with the frontline groups like Black Voters Matter. This will hit students, especially like the students in Savannah and in Atlanta and Athens. How many students have cars? The other is, of course, urban, low-income voters who don't have cars either, who are registering or re-registering. They just happen to be black or, of concern to the state, blue voters. So students, low-income people, urban people in urban areas who use public transportation, that is low-income people. In other words, they're literally saying you have to have a car in Georgia to vote. Again, they're not stopping you from registering. They're just going to withhold your registration until after the election. Again, they've pulled this stunt a couple times. Back in 2014, when I first met Stacey Abrams, I met her at the Ebenezer Baptist Church with Reverend Warnock, of all people, because they were concerned that this guy, Brian Kemp, their Secretary of State, had withheld for 6 months, 50,000 new registrants, young voters of color. He withheld their registrations until after a Senate election in 2014. Now they're pulling this stunt again. No other state that I know of does this, by the way. But this is really serious stuff because it's going to be down to, a handful of votes. It's a blood battle in Georgia right now.
This happened to your daughter, Greg?
Yeah, when she was a Georgia resident, student in Savannah for 4 years, and she tried to register. They said, "Oh, well, wait, you have a New York driver's license registered." She said, "Well, because on summer vacations I drive in New York, but I don't I don't in Savannah, Georgia. Everyone uses bicycles, right?" And but okay, so they withheld her registration. She had to fight them. So of course, a lot of her fellow students simply didn't go through the battle to get on the voter rolls. She did, but again, she missed an election, and this is January 5. The cutoff for registration is December 7, but Georgia has a rule that they don't put your name right on the voter rolls. They have to, quote, confirm your residence. This is, and now they're adding this new thing that they can withhold and say your residence isn't confirmed unless you have a car registered. And by the way, it says not only registered, but you will have had to have paid the registration tax. What does this have to do with voting except to knock out students, low-income people, urban people, the blue people?
Right. So this is mind-boggling. Kemp has done this before. How is this going to play out, Greg? I mean, I'm assuming that the NAACP or somebody is launching a legal suit. I mean, there's 2 weeks till the deadline for registration.
You're so telepathic, Tom. I just heard from the ACLU and others and our lawyers because, people have not noticed. Again, this was slipped in at midnight last night. They held hearings this morning, and they decided, the Board of Elections at 8 a.m. this morning with the Secretary of State there, we actually don't even have to vote in this new we don't have to hold hearings. Now, our person on the ground there, Terry Manpearl, asked, do you have a single case of fraud of someone coming in from out of state and registering? Do you have one case? This is going to knock out thousands of new voters. Do you have one case of fraud that backs this up? She got no answer. They said, we don't have to have a hearing. We don't have to answer questions because the Attorney General, a Republican, has now said we can simply implement this rule We don't even have to have a vote on it. It's really serious stuff, and they're sneaking it in without notice. That's why I'm shouting about it on your program. Please, I'm still telling people, if you're not registered, please check your registration, even if you think you are in Georgia. Cutoff is December 7th. And please do it now, because if you have to go through a confirmation process, my friends, you're going to miss January 5.
Yeah, and an easy way to check your registration is to go to iwillvote.com. That's the website that the Democratic Party put up that, plug in your Georgia zip code and it'll take you right to the Secretary of State's office. But are there other sites, Greg? I'm assuming you have information over at gregpalace.com?
Yes, at gregpalace.com, and we have, of course, the site that was launched by Leo DiCaprio, SaveMyVote.org. SaveMyVote.org, and you can look up if you're on the Georgia Purge list, but it has a link straight to the Secretary of State's office to re-register if you've been removed from the voter rolls. That's our first concern, or go straight to the Secretary of State's office on that link to register if you're not registered. I'm telling you, especially if you are a student, and you don't, and now we know, if you don't have a car, you better be checking your registration or registering right now.
But if you don't have a car, and like your daughter, she doesn't have a car, and she's got, a New York driver's license, even though she lives 9 months out of the year in Georgia, which qualifies you for residence because she's going to college.
Yes, she fought and won and voted. Yes.
Right, but over the next 2 weeks, Stacey Abrams is trying to sign up as many people as possible. Are any of them going to be able to vote, Greg? We got about 20 seconds.
You're going to have to fight for that vote. It's up to each county whether they're going to block you. I'm very, very concerned about this. So we don't know yet, but I'm on the phone with the lawyers, and we're not going to be silent about this.
Yeah, good idea. Good. Greg Palast, you can read all about it at gregpalast.com. Check out his latest book, too, How Trump Stole 2020. Greg, always great talking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thanks, Tom. Bye.
Yeah, we'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Thoughts on the Republican Party from me to you coming up next. Stick around. And then, of course, in our second hour, Congressman Ro Khanna, the whole hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
In our third hour, Q Anon and other cult conspiracies, the whole hour. It's going to be an interesting day. Stick around. And welcome back, Jim in Long Beach, California. Hey, Jim, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Hey, good morning. Love having Greg Palast come on time, right, with the information we need. That's really my question for you is how we outside of Georgia, where I guess millions and millions of dollars are pouring in, can help in the situation there. And it looks like, the game is very, very rigged. The issue of issues, counting the vote, is still in the air. So how can we see very many sites asking for money, but you never know if they're actually going to deliver,
right. What I can tell you what I did, Jim. I contacted my member of the House and both of my senators and, by email, and said, I think this is outrageous. I'll tweet this this afternoon once we've got the once Greg's piece goes up, I'll tweet it to them as well. You could also do that on their Facebook pages on social media. Sometimes that'll actually get a better ding than even an email. And then I went to Fair Vote. I think it is. Hang on just a minute. Let me just, before I give a URL out, I just want to double check it. I'm pretty sure Stacey Abrams' organization is Fair Vote, and they had a thing where you could make a contribution that it went three ways. Fairvote.org. One third of it went to Fair Vote, 1/3 went to Warnock, and 1/3 went to John Ossoff. Yeah. So
that's what
I thought that was great. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of Stacey Abrams. Whatever her next political adventure may be, I'm there. Her organization, Fair Vote, is all about registering people to vote in Georgia, and obviously they're going to need money for lawyers' fees and things like that. And then, of course, you've got some good candidates down there. So that's what's up on my mind. I got to run. Thanks
to Greg. Thanks to Greg.
I'll pass it along. Thanks a lot, Bill. Jim, excuse me. Good to hear from you. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Yeah, Joe, a little off. First off, on the voting thing, I have to do this. On the Help America Vote Act, why didn't they just make a condition in there that every state had to ask on their registration if you had been previously registered in another state? What a concept. Yes, I was. California. Okay, we will notify California to remove you from the voter roll. Sorry, totally off my point. Right. I think someone needs to remind the Joint Chiefs, the American people, the Congress, and Donald Trump that he has no constitutional authority to unilaterally start a war. None. Any order given by Trump to start a war, null and void. It's the duty of the Joint Chiefs to just say, we're not going to do that, Donnie boy, okay? And the authorized use of military force, Tom, that was a constitutional obscenity. That was without force, null and void at inception. Every member of Congress that voted for that violated the constitutional oath, and George Bush killed 2 countries. Okay, that's it.
Yeah. No, I agree, Bill, and I think that this whole idea of authorizations to use military force as if they're not declarations of war and therefore don't fall under the constitutional provisions that require war to be declared by Congress, not by the president, are obscene. Right. I'm with you. That's a good word for it. Bill, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, exposing the con in conservatives. Stick around. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I just want to lay this out. I mean, this is just becoming so obvious, I think, to most Americans that the Republican Party is not a legitimate party. It's not a legitimate political party and hasn't been for some time. That it's essentially a cult. And it's a cult that stands for one thing: the privilege and power of white men. Over the last 40 years, they developed all these bizarre and Byzantine rules to prevent low-income whites and people of color from voting. You know, like Greg was just telling us about in Georgia. Oh, you don't have a car registered here in Georgia? Well, we'll just hold on to your voter registration until after the January 5th election, and then we'll have a hearing about whether or not we're going to let you vote in Georgia, right? And now they're trying to throw out ballots in Detroit, majority black city, Philadelphia, a large black population. I'm not sure I don't think it's majority black. Atlanta, majority black city, I believe. It's just like, hey, let's pick these places where there's lots of people of color and just blow out their votes. I mean, they have been doing this for decades at both the state and the federal level. And it isn't just that. They've also been working aggressively to prevent women from having access to birth control. to prevent women from having access to women's health services, and to prevent women from having access to safe legal abortions. And you know, they've turned this you know, male supremacy thing into a religion. And of course, as a religion, it's being promoted by the religious hucksters out there as well. You know, when the coronavirus hit, most of the developed countries in the world started making direct payments to workers. Just going around the companies and just saying, okay, how much was this person making? Well, we'll write a check to them up to a certain amount. And, you know, so unemployed people could continue to get by. Norway, for example, right now has an unemployment rate of 2%. There's a lot of people who aren't working. They're getting their paychecks from the government. The economy in Norway is actually growing right now. Of course, they've also got the coronavirus largely under control. But anyhow, here in the United States, we tried this with the CARES Act. Hey, let's give everybody $600 a week. And the Republicans were like, well, we'll go along with that. We'll give you know, working people $600 a week for 2-3 months. But you've got to give the fat cats, the billionaires, you know, the Mitt Romney level rich guys, the really, really, really rich guys, the Kelly Loeffler, you know, a multi-millionaire Kelly Loeffler flying back and forth from Georgia to Washington, D.C. in her own $25 million private plane. You thought having a Tesla was a status symbol, right? We want to make sure that they get giant tax breaks and huge subsidies that don't just expire in 3 months like the $600 a week does, but that last forever. Forever. And the taxes on average working people will start going up next year. And they got it in the law. There it is. Fat cats and big corporations making out like bandits. Average working Americans screwed. The Republicans have worked for years to gut workers' rights, to destroy labor unions, and to hold the minimum wage below starvation levels. They put the profits of polluting corporations above the rights of average Americans to have clean air, pure water, and a safe food supply. They fight to help monopolies and giant corporations control market share while wiping out small and medium-sized businesses across dozens of sectors. They're working as hard as they can right now to destroy America's national parks and wild areas so that their fossil fuel donors can extract more profits from land that was put in trust for all of us, in some cases more than a century ago by Teddy Roosevelt. They're openly promoting lies about global warming to help those same fossil fuel donors at the expense of a possibly civilization-ending environmental catastrophe. They have supported a president who lied about masks and other common-sense public health measures, while the wealthy and the billionaire class are living in their gated private mansions with, you know, live-in bubbled staff, and when they have to travel, they use, like Kelly Loeffler does, they use their own personal private jets. Their campaigns and slogans that have openly targeted people of color for over a century include law and order, save our heritage, our Confederate statues and military base names. Trump is willing to go to the mat on this one, you know, blowing up the defense budget just to keep the names of Confederate traitor generals on military bases. And jobs, not mobs, yeah. This is, you know, from Nixon's Southern strategy to Trump's birtherism. That's the Republican Party. Hating on black people has been their poll star. And then, you know, illegal immigration, quote. The majority of the people in this country, even from Mexico, who are here without documentation, did not sneak across the Rio Grande River. They came across a border crossing in Tijuana or Juarez or El Paso or whatever, like they were coming in here to shop for groceries for the day, and they just never went home. But Trump's got to have his racist wall to prove his racist bona fides, right? And he's built 3 whole miles of it. Yes, they've renovated over 100 miles, but they're always doing that. You can't name a single piece of legislation that Republicans have put into place for the average American in the last 40 years. Instead, they're trying to gut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And now they're openly embracing Nazis, religious fanatics, and conspiracy theorists. The Republican Party is no longer a party.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scup poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that y'all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
On this week's Science Revolution, why are the Republicans saying the mask mandate is anti-freedom? If you're hooked up to a ventilator and you can't breathe, you're not free. The Republican idea of freedom is literally killing us. Nick Dearden with Global Justice Now joins me to ask who should own the COVID vaccine that was funded by we the people. Plus, Teresa Brown, RN, author of Critical Care, drops in to explain why the COVID task force needs nurses. There's a lack of nursing representation despite their essential and visible role on the front line of this national pandemic, and that needs to be fixed ASAP. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Even the vaccine czar, right? I mean, this is how bizarre it gets. They wanted to hire a guy to be the vaccine czar who was going to oversee all this stuff, with regard to the vaccine. Monsef Salawi is the name. He's one of the top scientists on Operation Warp Speed. But he's on the board of directors of Moderna, which is taking a lot of money to develop a vaccine and has come out with one of these two. And so they said, if you want to be on this vaccine board, you've got to sell your stock so you don't have an obvious conflict of interest. And he said, well, I'm not willing to do that. And they said, okay, cool. We'll make you a contractor rather than a government employee so you don't, the conflict of interest laws won't apply to you. So if they're just saying to one of their grifters, hey, come on in and just participate in our grift and we'll let you keep getting rich, how much money do you think that the Trump crime family is making off inside information? Because, if you're the vaccine czar, you can certainly make a fortune on inside information. We know Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue did this, selling stock when they heard that the economy was going to tank, buying stock for companies like Citrix, which makes the go-to-my-seat PC product that people use for remote office work, buying stock in Netflix because people are going to be home more, buying it's like grift is like the official religion of the Republican Party. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Daryl in Danville, New Jersey. Hey, Daryl, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
Great. What's up?
Yeah, I actually joined Parler because so many of these, right-wingers are moving from Twitter to Parler so they can engage in disinformation with impunity. And I'm telling you, Tom, it is a cult, and we are going to be in the middle of a serious mental health crisis pretty soon.
You think we're not already?
Well, I think what we have is people who are living in an alternative reality, but they don't realize they're living in an alternative reality because they're being told that, every time there's some negative news on Trump, they say, don't listen to this, don't watch this news network, do not read this newspaper, do not listen to this pundit. And basically they're limiting their information flow to OAN, Newsmax, Breitbart, and a bunch of websites that you've never heard of that just sort of popped up out of nowhere. And it's really to watch them and to engage with them as they twist themselves into knots to sort of explain away, all of this negative news on the Trump campaign's effort to overturn this election is really sad in a way. It's like, we don't allow drugs near schools for a reason, right? We don't say, well, let the kids take drugs. We don't allow this because kids are not young enough, or are not old enough to be able to make good decisions. So we don't let drugs near schools. These people are like, and I don't say this to be elitist, but a lot of these people are simple people with very little education, with very little intellectual curiosity. And so allowing this sort of crazy information flow to these is like giving drugs to children. And it's,
well, it's not just allowing, Daryl. It's being promoted. This is a website, or Parler is an app. I've downloaded the app, but I did, when I went to sign up, they want your phone number and your email address and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, I don't want to give that to the Mercer family. Well, maybe I'll decide to later this afternoon. You've piqued my curiosity. But
I created a Google Voice number.
Oh, well, that's an interesting way to do it. I was thinking of just putting in a phony phone number, 555-1212 or something like that. But we'll see. They may not accept that. I don't know. Maybe there's a way of. Did they validate your membership through your phone? Was that their way of confirming it?
They did. They did.
And getting permission to text
I used my Google. Yeah, and I use my Google Voice to respond, and so my account is validated. But these people are crazier than you know. We know that they're crazy because they still believe that Trump won this election by not just that he won the election. They believe he won the election by a landslide. And so I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Daryl, we're going to, the third hour of the show is going to be all about that. And I need to get other people in here and give other folks a chance to weigh in. But thank you for the information. It's great to hear from you. And I appreciate that. Richard in Aiken, South Carolina. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Yes. My question is about, since we have a runoff in Georgia, shouldn't the contest be between the people who voted for either candidates and are already registered, as opposed to suddenly having a flood of new registrations?
Why? Why, Richard? Why would you object to any legal voter, any person in Georgia who is of legal voting age and is a citizen in the United States from voting in any election?
Why wouldn't they have voted in the regular election?
Maybe they just turned 18. Maybe they didn't get around to it. Maybe they couldn't get a day off work. There's there's 1,000 reasons people don't vote, but it's none of your business or mine. It's none of our damn business, Richard, why somebody didn't vote. The fact of the matter is either voting is a right in this country or it's not. And, we give a lot of lip service to it being a right. And if we're going to continue giving lip service to that, you can't say, oh, you can't vote in this election because you didn't vote in the last one. That's the kind of stuff they do in Russia and Hungary.
I'm not saying that exactly. I'm saying that there was a contest voting on November 3rd, and the people who participated in that should be participating in the runoff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I get your opinion. I respectfully disagree, but thank you, Richard, for your contribution to the discussion. Carrie in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Carrie, what's up?
Hey. Well, my question is that provided there's a Biden administration and the attempted Trump coup doesn't work, is there going to be any initiative or push towards abolishing the Electoral College?
There's two ways to abolish the Electoral College. The first is by a constitutional amendment. And in 1977, the House of Representatives was 3 votes short of making that happen. It would have passed the Senate. And, which is pretty amazing. I mean, it was a totally bipartisan thing. Everybody was like, hey, this thing has been around for 240 years. It was originally put into place largely because it could take a week for news to travel from the remote states, from northern New Hampshire or southern Georgia to Washington, D.C. And so, we'll just have people send their representatives basically to vote for the president. And, they're trusted, wise elders. That was the whole idea. Within 40 years, it was completely unnecessary. And in 1977, there was this broad consensus.
Sort of a racist thing too, right?
Well, it worked to the benefit of some of the southern states, yes. But largely because of the Three-Fifths Compromise. But, the real reason for it was, Alexander Hamilton lays it out in the Federalist Papers. I think it's number 54, where he talks about how, if you're in a remote area, there's no way that you can ever meet or get to know a politician running for president. You could do that with a governor or with a county executive or a mayor, but not the guy running for president. So instead, you vote for a person that you trust, a trusted member of the community who has never been elected to public office, who therefore has no dog in the fight and is not a member of a political party. I mean, that's right there in the Constitution, not the party part, because they didn't have parties at the time, but they've never been elected to public office. And that person will go to Washington, D.C., and as Alexander Hamilton laid out, determine if the candidate, who the state sent them to vote for, is a man of, quote, low moral character. And if so, then they can vote for the other guy. That was the whole idea of it. Well, in 1977, we said, this is crazy. So, number one, constitutional amendment. That ain't going to happen now because the Republicans are in love with the Electoral College because it's the only way George Bush became president. Al Gore actually won 500,000 more votes in the national vote. And it's the only way Donald Trump became president. Right. Hillary Clinton won 3 million votes. The other way to do it is to get enough states to represent 270 electoral votes to sign on to this interstate compact. It's called the nationalpopularvote.com compact, and you can get all the information, Carrie, at nationalpopularvote.com, and be sure that you get the .com, and lobby your state. I don't know if Missouri is a member of the compact or not, but they need about I think they need something on the order of around 80 more electoral votes, states representing many more votes to make it work. Carrie,
You're
thanks.
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment, and Congressman Khanna, of course, will be with us the entire next hour. Stick around. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, what's on your mind today?
Tom, good day to you, sir, and your teammates. Didn't Richard Byrd was also arrested for insider trading because he went against Trump?
I don't know who he is.
He's the chairman of the Intelligence Committee from North Carolina.
Richard Burr, B-U-R-R. I'm
Yes.
sorry, I thought you said Byrd.
Yes.
He was not arrested. He was simply outed, basically, but he has not suffered any consequences from that.
Yeah, and that was just to prove your point that Purdue and the other lady was engaged in insider trading and nothing happened to them. But and then the other person, who went against Trump, absolutely was outed. But what I wanted to ask you, Tom, is this Trumpism? I mean, is it going to stay after Trump leaves? Is Tom Cotton going to pick up where Trump left off? I know you said probably he's going to be the next Trump. What's going to happen to Trumpism? This thing that Trump tapped into and brought to the surface.
Yeah. I don't have a crystal ball, Omar, but my sense is that Trump got, he got 70 some odd million people to vote for him. And, which is not any small accomplishment. I'm guessing that probably at least half of those people who voted for him because they like his racism, they like his xenophobia, they like his misogyny, his white supremacy, his male supremacy. I mean, and the other half who voted for him just, always vote for Republicans because, whatever. I mean, they listen to right-wing talk radio, or they just have this identity, NASCAR Republican kind of thing. But, typically racism goes hand in hand with that, with all the Confederate memorabilia and everything else.
I agree with you.
My guess is that Trump is, Trump 3 weeks ago rolled out this brand new PAC called the Save America PAC. And that PAC, I'm getting, again, overnight, in the last 24 hours, I've gotten at least 8 fundraising requests from Donald Trump, from Rudy Giuliani, from the president of the RNC, Ronna Romney McDaniel, Mitt Romney's niece. I'm getting all these, emails begging me for money, and when I click on them, 100% of the time they go to 60% of the money goes to the Save America PAC, 40% goes to the RNC. No matter what they say they're for, they say they're to recount the vote, or they say they're to pay for lawyers, or they say they're to defend your right to vote, or they say they're to push back on the fake news. It's always a different excuse or reason or battle that we're fighting on your behalf, Tom, or Fred, as the case may be. But when you click on it, what you see is that the money's actually going to Donald Trump. And he's got what's called a leadership PAC, which means he can use that money for pretty much, about half his living expenses. And he can also use that money to buy politicians. He can just pass that money along to politicians that he wants to support or help. This is how Mitch McConnell controls the Senate. Is he has a leadership PAC like this. It brings in tens of millions of dollars a year, and then he redistributes that money to Republican senators based on how they're voting and whether they're voting with him and all that kind of stuff. It's like old machine politics. It's like this giant bribery scam. But there's no doubt in my mind that Donald Trump has figured out he can make more money in politics than in real estate, and so he's going to stay in politics. The question is, how many people are going to follow him? So, and I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, Omar. Omar, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at TomHartmann.com. I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now, and this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it. And that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at TomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. Welcome back. Justin in Summit Hill, Pennsylvania. Hey, Justin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how's it going? I've been listening to all this stuff about Kelly Loeffler and doing all these crimes and that sort of stuff. Why don't we start calling the Republicans exactly what they do? Because they always call us communists and that sort of stuff. Why don't we call them corporate communists? Because that's all they seem to do is put up things for corporations and for themselves. It would be an easy contest to toss it back at them because, that's just the truth. Well,
there's another and better word that describes corporate rule. Benito Mussolini, back in the late 1920s, invented this word, and he said it was the merger of corporate and state interests. He said it could better be known as corporatism, but he liked his new word, and it was based on the bundle of sticks with an axe sticking in the top of it with a rope wrapped around it, which was the symbol of the Roman Empire for 1,000 years or however long it was, hundreds of years. And the idea was one stick you can break, but if you have a bundle of sticks tied together, you can't break that. And that bundle of sticks, which, by the way, is carved into the speaker's podium in the House of Representatives, That bundle of sticks is called a fasce, F-A-S-C-H-E, or A-E, or F-A, however you spell it, yeah. And so what he did was he created this political and economic system named after the ancient Roman fasce. He called it fascism. And he said it's when corporations and the state work together to, to their mutual interest. And so rather than calling these guys communists, I think calling them fascists is the appropriate thing to do. Henry Wallace, the vice president under Franklin Roosevelt, called them fascists in the New York Times repeatedly.
Well, here's the thing, because their trigger word is communist and that sort of stuff. So if we use the corporate communist, it just makes it worse, because the fact is that it's not communist for the people, but it's communist for the high-rich businesses and that sort of stuff. So we use their own jargon against them and basically flutter them. Not only that, but also point out the fact that Loeffler and Purdue are numbnuts that are nothing but thieves. I mean,
there you go. It's an idea, Justin. It's an idea. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's a good one. Paula in Miami. Hey, Paula, what's up? Oh, you're waiting for Khanna? For Congressman Khanna?
Well,
I can put you back on hold.
It was about the post office, so I don't know if he could help, if there's some recourse.
Well, let me put you on hold, and you can ask him, when he comes up. It'll just be about 10 minutes from now, so I'm going to stick you back on hold. Craig in Half Moon Bay, California. Hey, Craig, what's up?
Good morning, Barney. I called you 2 weeks ago, and we got a bunch of responses, and I wanted to answer their questions and your objections to blockchain voting versus mailed voting. There were only 3 things they brought up and something you brought up. And I want full disclosure. I am an expert at this. I have a patent in AI encryption and attack detection. I've written a lot of software. So may I proceed with 3 objections and questions they brought up and you brought up?
You may have 60 seconds, Craig.
Thank you. The first one was you saying mail-in ballots are great. And I said, well, we have an honest Governor Newsom who mailed one to me that I never got thanks to DeJoy. And so I suggest there should be another alternative for people to vote safely at home with a phone or a tablet. One of your callers said, well, what if I don't have a phone or a laptop? And I don't know anybody in America who doesn't know somebody with a phone or a laptop. And the third thing was something you brought up about security. The military uses a system called VOTE, V-O-E-T-Z or something, when they're overseas. And there's another one called votetool.org. It's open source. And I just believe that with open source and, as Edward Snowden said, end-to-end encryption, you are secure. You're able to vote safely at home. And that caller you had earlier, Richard, who said people shouldn't vote because of some reason. I think when you turn 18, like you said, and you're a citizen, everybody should be allowed to vote. Felons too, but that's my own opinion.
I'm with you. Craig, I'm guessing that probably within 5 years or so, what you're envisioning will be. But right now, my default is paper. And paper through the mail works really, really well. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Been a while. Last week you had a rant on fleecing, the Republican Party fleecing the states. Basically, it was about, I live in a red state, and I'm going to use that point of view, that in Iowa we give about 80% of the federal taxes we pay comes back to Iowa. And it's similar to that, or a little bit less than that in Nebraska, similar to that of California and New York. Now, but I'm in a Republican state, a red state, and it's Republicans that are being fleeced by this, giving this 20% to states that are in the rears, like Mississippi, Kentucky, and stuff like that. Yeah. So you touched my heart with this rant. The point I wanted to make was you fell short one step. That is redistribution of wealth. That is an antitrust issue with the Republican Party. So here it is, Republicans being fleeced by Republicans, and the Republican senators and Democrats are not coming home and being straight with their voting public.
You got it, Randy. And they're redistributing wealth. Oh, my God. Thank you, Randy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabby.com. Gabby takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabby.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. Hello Fresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other,
to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around, and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning in Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Ro, R-O, Khanna, Rep Ro Khanna. And he represents the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area in the U.S. House of Representatives. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program. Before we get started, I'm just wondering what's on the top of your mind. What do you want to share with people? What do you think that we need to know about or do something about right now?
Tom, I appreciate it. The biggest issue is for us to finally get some stimulus passed. We didn't get it done before the election. It now looks, with Mitch McConnell having adjourned till November 30th, that we're still not going to get anything done. And if we go till February without having any unemployment extension, without having any rent assistance or assistance for people's mortgages or schools, that's a real disaster and is doing long-term damage to our economy. The second thing is of course, the President-elect Biden has started rolling out appointments. Most of them have been solid. I think Jake Sullivan is someone who can help get us back into the Iran nuclear deal. I think the other picks as well are professionals who will engage in diplomacy. I do have some concerns on Flournoy at Defense has been floated just because of her record of escalation in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think it's very important that if she is going to be confirmed, we press for a continued withdrawal from Afghanistan and make sure we don't replicate the mistakes in Yemen.
Yeah, all good stuff. All good stuff. Okay. You want to pick up some phone calls?
That would be great.
Okay, let's do it. Mary Gay in Spokane, Washington. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Representative Khanna. Is this a hostile corporate takeover of our government? I think we just need to reframe this. I don't. So, what do you think?
Basically what the Republican Party is up to, Mary?
Yeah, yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Well, Mary, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's corporate interests that have been driving the Republican Party, but this is not new. I mean, when William Jennings Bryan was opposed back in the time of the populist movement, he had built a multiracial coalition, and he was really opposed because moneyed interests got together and tried to appeal to a sense of racial grievance. This has been the Republican strategy for arguably a century, which is to do the bidding of corporate interests and to appeal to racial grievance in building a broader coalition, because you just can't win elections with the 1% supporting you. So we need to continue to make that case and recognize that our policies are supported by many people.
Paula in Miami, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for taking my call. I have a question about the joy with the post office. On Election Day, 27% of the mail ballots were held up in Miami-Dade and never made it to Tallahassee. And they were told to have them there by like 3 p.m. that day. They were told, and they said, no, we can't do it. We could have flipped Florida, and I guarantee you we could have won by millions more if it weren't for the post office. And I want to know what you could do about this guy. Can you throw him in jail? Can you do hearings and indict this man for holding up the mail? We would have won by much greater amounts.
I appreciate it, and this is an untold story. I mean, people are falsely talking about fraud on the Republican side. The real suppression and fraud was the not having so many mail ballots reach, and it wasn't just Florida; it was a lot of other states. Now, Biden won those states, so it hasn't been a story. But there are hundreds of thousands of ballots more that we would have, that Biden and Harris would have had if it weren't for the delay in the post office and DeJoy's actions. I do think there should be an investigation, and the Justice Department should look into the role he played. And if there is evidence that he in any way engaged in intentional sabotage of the mail getting there, that's a crime, and it is definitely something that should be investigated, in my opinion.
Jeff in San Francisco, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Jeff? San Francisco? Not happening. Okay, let's try Joe in Cupertino. Nearby.
Oh,
you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
I'm here. Okay. Congressman, it's a pleasure. Again, thanks for representing us. I was wondering if it feels a little edgy. Governor's on quarantine. He's going to call you pretty soon and ask if you want to be a senator, but I'm just guessing. I heard that last caller. I think solicitation of election fraud in the first degree is a felony. I think that's what the slate said. And I'm wondering if you agree I guess Tom had brought somebody up yesterday or the week before about restorative justice. I'm into retaliatory justice. I don't think you can let a senator cut from another state come and talk to the Secretary of State of a neighboring state, tell them, this and that and the other, and then say I didn't do anything and get away with it. So if you're appointed to the Senate, can we have a hearing and make sure that this does not happen again, ever? Because that's not right. I don't think that's in the spirit of the Constitution. Do you?
Joe, I agree with you. It's wrong. It's anti-democratic. Here's what I believe. I think first we need to see what we can do to strengthen our election laws and protect our democracy. We saw what happens when you have a demagogue get into the presidency, and that the system wasn't designed with enough protection. So we need to take every action to prevent some of what Trump did, and so that doesn't happen again. Part of that needs to be is strengthening rules if the laws aren't on the books for the type of interference that took place with Senator Graham. If the laws are on the books, then they need to be enforced, and it needs to be investigated. But I believe that the investigation ultimately needs to be done by an independent and strong Justice Department. We're going to have competent people there. I think what Congress should do is focus on delivering for the American people. What are we doing to get people health care? What are we doing for infrastructure? What are we doing for job creation? What are we doing to raise wages? That's why we were elected, and that needs to be 80-90% of our time and effort.
Diego in Orlando, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna. Got about a minute to the break.
All right. Congressman, I just wanted to ask you about what you thought about minimum wage. $15 minimum wage just got implemented here in Florida. It's a big win for us, but the state and actually people around are very split on that. Do you think that's something that could ever get implemented federally? And what do you think are the advantages of that?
Diego, it was a great point. Thank you for what you did. It shows that these policies that help people get better wages resonate. I don't think we talked about it enough in the campaign. We need to be the party that's going to deliver good-paying jobs, that's going to raise people's wages. It, of course, makes sense economically. Until, minimum wage came into this country in 1938. Until 1968, it was tied to productivity increases. Basically, as productivity increased, the minimum wage increased. The relationship was severed in 68. If minimum wage had kept in pace with productivity increases, you would have seen the wage be $24 today. So when people talk about raising the wage, it's important to understand that this is not charity. It's paying people what they deserve.
Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents Silicon Valley, 17th District, Congressional District in California in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at RepRo, R-O, RepRo Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's a Monday National Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him in just a moment. And welcome back. Congressman, you just said that the minimum wage was tied to productivity from 38 to 68, and that changed in 68. I was unaware of that, which seems like a huge thing to have missed. What was that by statute, by policy? What was the deal? How did that?
I don't think it was. I don't think there was an actual law. But if you look at the Economic Institute has a study on it that basically between 38 and 68. For all intents, Congress was raising the wage so that, as a statistical matter, it kept pace with the rise in productivity. And in 68 is when it stopped doing that. And from 68, in fact, there's a whole article. I'm happy to send it to you afterwards that the Economic Policy Institute did. And so and this author it goes on to point out that from 68. To today, the wage hasn't kept up with productivity. If it did, it would be $24. So you really have this situation with worker productivity. Workers are adding value, and then their wages are being taken from them and redistributed to the investor class and the executive class.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Even if you believe in total free market capitalism, free enterprise, the way I was taught it at University of Chicago, your wage should equal your productivity, and that's not the case today.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you. Fred in Bremerton, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Paul, I'm a descendant of a long line of Californians. I moved up here to the great Northwest, live in God's country. My question pertains to the vetting of members of the cabinet. Is there some legal obligation that these people have when they're a member of the cabinet not to divulge information to public or to the enemy in order to, I don't know, save their own bacon, say? Because I'm concerned about this Khashoggi murder and why Jared Kushner isn't being held accountable legally for outing him, because he's never a member of the cabinet, a legal vetted member of the cabinet.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, there are laws. It's a crime to leak classified information. It's something that's a very, very serious matter. And it's certainly a crime to be interfering with directly undermining American foreign policy by doing that. So the question is just, will it be enforced, and is there evidence of it? But the laws are on the books to prevent that.
Yeah, and for the record, Kushner's not a member of the cabinet. He's an White House advisor, I think is his official title. But, you know, it seems like there's a fair amount of evidence that he's the one who told Mohammed bin Salman, you know, that he could go get Khashoggi. And, you know, do you think that, you know, what body in Congressman, we just have 20 seconds, what body in Congress would look into that kind of thing?
Well, it could be the Government Oversight Committee. It could be the Armed Services Committee, though the Armed Services Committee tends to shy away from those kind of investigations. I think government oversight is there. But maybe what President Biden should do, President-elect Biden, is appoint a commission to look into all of these things.
Yeah, there's a pile of them. There's a huge pile of them. We'll be back with more of your questions for Congressman Khanna in just a moment. It is the Thom Hartmann Program, talk media for the sane among us. Check out Congressman Khanna's website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. We'll be right back. I'm speaking at Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. So we've got a new video up over at TomHartmann.com for folks who are supporting the program about how big pharma, the big pharmaceutical companies, might be the lever that the healthcare industry uses to destroy Medicare for all, or even a public option as we move into and toward the Biden administration. And how do they do that? Well, they're spending $30 billion a year on advertising. The United States is the only country in the world, the only developed country in the world, that allows drug companies to advertise with very, very few restrictions on television. Only one other country, New Zealand, allows any kind of drug advertising on television. But in the United States, the door is largely wide open. And as a result, all of the television networks are hooked on money from big pharma and big health, as it were. You can check out all the details over at TomHartmann.com with our new video for the supporters of our program. Thank you. Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Wayne in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman Khanna, would it help if Democrats use the phrases like Republicans want to defund Social Security and Medicare, they want to defund the military to pay for the wall, and defund the post office? Because they're trying to use that against the Democrats, that word, defund.
That's a great point. I actually think that's a really strong point, that we ought to be talking about them defunding Social Security, that they're the ones who want to defund public services. They're the party that wants to actually be defunding public services, defunding the safety net in this country. That's a great point.
Andy in Lakewood, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hello, Congressman Khanna. I just want to talk about all you Democrats having a hard time getting on TV and getting a little angry, just like the guys from Detroit. Get a little angry and call out Trump for he is. He's a liar. He's a liar. He's lying about everything. And bring the word trust in there. You can't trust a liar a president as being a liar. You can't trust him to say anything when he lies all the time. And he violated all the 10 Commandments, just about. Thou shalt not lie was the first one, the major one, that he lies all the time. One of the 10 Commandments. And go on and so on and so on. Thank you very much.
Andy, I share your view. I think that outrage is shared by almost everyone in Congress. We've seen him lie over and over again. We've seen him betray the American trust. What I would say is now, in the post-Trump era, we need to allow the rule of law, the Justice Department, to hold the administration accountable. And we need to focus, in my view, in Congress on rebuilding, on providing people with the jobs and increase in wages and the health care, the things that led to so much of the anger and disillusionment with our system.
Paul in Elmhurst, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Congressman, I want to know if there's anything can be, or what is the plan for the likes of Joe Manchin, the senator, who's already made it clear that he's not going to vote for to break the filibuster if we need it to the same way as the Republicans done. He's also already said that he's not going to vote for to put members on the Supreme Court and several other things that are against our progressive values. How can we check that, Senator? Because if he votes against all of it, well, then it doesn't matter those two senators. We're still going to be, Manchin is going to wreck the whole thing. What do you think?
Well, I agree with you that even if we do win the 2 Georgia seats, it's not going to be easy because we have a senator who is really down the middle on many of these issues and represents a constituency that overwhelmingly voted for Trump. This is why we need to continue to build for our policies and have a better election outcome for the Senate and House in 22 than we had this time. Until we can make substantial gains in the Senate and the House, it's going to be very hard to get a progressive agenda. Remember, Obama had almost 58 or so senators and huge House majorities, and still it was difficult. Now I think we will be able to eliminate the filibuster this time, but it's going to take more than just the Georgia wins, as important as the Georgia wins are.
David in El Paso, Texas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman. My question is, I just read the book Democracy in Chains by Nancy McLean, and it's quite interesting the amount of influence Charles Koch and James Buchanan have had on Republican politics over the years. My question is, are current Republicans in Congress, specifically Senate, are they just libertarians in disguise?
David, no. I mean, I think there are libertarians, but there are a lot of folks who believe in a cultural conservatism. There are a lot of them who are Trumpists, whatever you define Trump's ideology to be. But it's not all libertarian. In fact, I would say that the animating spirit is more on cultural issues for many of the Republicans who've been elected to Congress.
We just have 45 seconds. Isn't cultural issues kind of code for white male supremacy?
Well, I think it depends. I mean, it's in certain cases, like the congressman from Iowa, I forget, Steve King. Yes. In other cases, I think what people are expressing is a anxiety about a changing America. And I look, what we're trying to do as a nation is very hard. We're 60% white. Britain is in the 70s or 80s. Canada is 80%. Australia is 80%. There hasn't ever been a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy in the history of the world. So a lot of those tensions are being played out in Congress.
That's a fascinating point. That's an absolutely fascinating point, worthy of a Francis Fukuyama treatment. A deep dive. Congressman Ro Khanna with us, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 17th District of California in the U.S. House, taking your calls for the hour in a national town hall meeting right here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls for Congressman Khanna right after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Ezra Klein's new book, Why We're Polarized. This is from the introduction, and it's a couple pages into it. I'm starting out here. I have found that American politics is best understood by braiding two forms of knowledge that are often left separate: the direct on-the-ground insights shared by politicians, activists, government officials, and other subjects of my reporting, and the more systemic analyses conducted by political scientists, sociologists, historians, and others with the time, methods, and expertise to study American politics at scale. On their own, political actors often ignore the incentives shaping their decisions, and academic researchers miss the human motivations that drive political decision-making. Together, however, they shine bright light on how and why American politics works the way it does. There's much awry in American politics, and I won't in this book attempt to catalog all of it. But I've come to believe the master story, the one that drives almost all divides and most fundamentally shapes the behavior of participants, is the logic of polarization. That logic, put simply, is this: to appeal to a more polarized public, political institutions and political actors behave in more polarized ways. As political institutions and actors become more polarized, they further polarize the public. This sets off a feedback cycle. To appeal to a yet more polarized public, institutions must polarize further. When faced with yet more polarized institutions, the public polarizes further, and so on. Understanding that we exist in relationship with our political institutions, that they are changed by us and we are changed by them, is the key to this story. We don't just use politics for our own ends. Politics uses us for its own ends. There are many different types of polarization possible, and I'll discuss some of them later in the book, but the locus of polarization I'll discuss is on political identity. And that requires saying a few words about a term that should be very useful in American politics, but that has become almost useless: identity politics. A core argument of this book is that everyone engaged in American politics is engaged in identity politics. This is not an insult, and it's not controversial. We form and fold identities constantly, naturally. Identity is present in politics in the way gravity, evolution, or cognition is present in politics. That is to say, it is omnipresent in politics because it is omnipresent in us. There is no way to read the literature on how humans form and protect their personal and group identities, literature I will survey in this book, and believe that any of us is immune. It runs so deep in our psyches, so activated so easily by even weak cues and distant threats, that it is impossible to speak seriously about how we engage with one another without discussing how our identities shape that engagement. Unfortunately, the term identity politics has been weaponized. It is most often used by speakers to describe politics as practiced by members of historically marginalized groups. If you're black and you're worried about police brutality, that's identity politics. If you're a woman and you're worried about the male-female pay gap, that's identity politics. But if you're a rural gun owner decrying universal background checks as tyranny, or a billionaire CEO complaining that high tax rates demonize success, or a Christian insisting on nativity scenes in public squares, well, that's just good old-fashioned politics. With a quick sleight of hand, identity becomes something that only marginalized groups have. The term identity politics in this usage obscures rather than illuminates. It's used to diminish and discredit the concerns of weaker groups by making them look self-interested. Special pleading in order to clear the agenda for the concerns of stronger groups, which are framed as more rational, proper topics for normal political debate. But in wielding identity as a blade, we have lost it as a lens, blinding ourselves in a bid for political advantage. We're left searching in vain for what we refuse to allow ourselves to see. All politics is influenced by identity. Those identities are most powerful when they are so pervasive as to be either invisible or uncontroversial. American is an identity. So too is Christian. When politicians, including the irreligious, end speeches with "God bless America," it's not because they're making an appeal to a higher power, but because they're making an appeal to our bedrock identities. If you don't believe me, ask yourself why there are so few open atheists or even agnostics in national politics. This does not mean that politics is an equation solved by locating identity. Identity shapes our worldview, but it does not mechanistically decide it. And while we often speak of identity as a singular, it is always a dizzying plural. We have countless identities, some of them in active conflict with each other, others lying dormant until activated by threat or fortune. Much that happens in political campaigns is best understood as a struggle over which identities voters will inhabit come election day. Will they feel like workers exploited by their bosses, or heartlanders dismissed by coastal elites? Will they vote as patriotic traditionalists offended by NFL players who kneel during the national anthem, or as parents worried about the climate their children will inhabit? What we are often fighting over in American politics is group identity and status. Fights that express themselves in debates over policy and power, but cannot be truly reconciled by either. Health policy is positive sum, but identity conflict is zero sum. The book Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Did you know that there have been 8 federal judges who have been convicted and removed from the federal bench? 15 altogether have been impeached. 8 have been removed from office since, since the beginning. 3 of them since 1988, including one judge, Thomas Porteous down in Louisiana, who was impeached and removed from office for signing false financial declarations under penalty of perjury, which it turns out it looks like Clarence Thomas did for quite a number of years when he did not disclose, as he is required by law to do, that his wife was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Heritage Foundation. That and his perjury around Anita Hill and others, there were numerous witnesses that didn't even get called, could legitimately spark an impeachment of Clarence Thomas. We got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program. Check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And David in Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Congressman, I was wondering what influence you have over President Biden's choice of cabinet members. Why doesn't he choose more progressive cabinet members? That's what we voted for, really.
David, in candor, I have almost no influence on Biden's choices. I mean, he is the president. He's surrounded with a transition team, and certainly on high picks of the cabinet, I don't have any influence. What I think the progressives can do is make sure that the commitments that these nominees make, especially during the confirmation process, are substantial. And that's why when you look at someone like Michelle Flournoy, who's being considered at the Defense Department, she's someone who advocated for the surge in Afghanistan, for Iraq, the war in Libya, criticized Obama for not having enough force in Syria. I think there needs to be a clear commitment from her that she isn't going to follow the same policies, that we're going to get out of Afghanistan, that she's going to stop the war in Yemen by stopping arms sales to the Saudis. And these are questions that I think Congress can and must ask.
Dennis in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you. Could any of President Trump's and his attorneys' actions post-election be considered sedition?
That's a interesting thought. I mean, it depends, I think, how far they go. I mean, certainly they have the right to appeal in court, even though these are frivolous lawsuits, and they have the right to do what they're doing. Now, if they cross the line and start asking ballots to be thrown out or start disrupting, I guess the best argument would be disrupting the transition, then I think you could have a case. But let's see, where that line is, and my hope is that it's not going to come to that.
Hugo in Covina, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Representative Ro Khanna, I'm not politically savvy, but my question is,
if Donald Trump happens to pardon himself or his family members, does that bar him from running for office, any of them, in 2024?
Does a pardon? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Whether a pardon bars you from running for federal office. I don't think it does. But Tom, do you know?
I don't know. No, I don't. I'm guessing that it doesn't have any effect, but because there's no. I'm with you. I don't know the answer, but my guess would be no. Dale in Kearney, Nebraska. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for what you do, and Representative Khanna, you as well. As a retired person, I've grown very, very concerned over the barrage of Medicare Advantage ads that I'm seeing run day and night on the TV. And the only thing that I can figure out is it's going to be pretty hard to put in a Medicare for All program if there's no Medicare. And when I get on Facebook, I see a lot of retirees that are going over to the Medicare Disadvantage program. And what's the Democrats going to do to try and stop this onslaught against our government program?
Well, I appreciate that. Tom and I have discussed this. It comes up almost every national town hall. It is outrageous. I mean, there are studies that have been done that show that these Medicare Advantage programs are really overcharging. They're fleecing the American taxpayers. The plans often turn out not to be great once you actually get a catastrophic illness. So we need to have more hearings on them, investigate them, make sure that they're being held accountable to taxpayers, and make sure that they're being required to appropriately disclose what benefits they would provide.
Jeffrey in New York City, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Mr. Hartman and Congressman Ro Khanna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. My question is, is there a way we could float a bill that can enact a law that can prevent sitting presidents from being protected by the fact that he sits in a seat? I mean, where we could, because what good are checks and balances if we cannot remove a sitting president? Like doing things.
You're talking about the Justice Department policy of not investigating or prosecuting sitting presidents, Jeffrey?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I think it's an important point, and that is something that we should look into to removing. I mean, the idea behind that was you don't want the criminalization of politics and having every president subject to criminal probes by the opposing party. But I think that when you have blatant criminality and accusations of criminality, there ought to be an independent agency, frankly, that doesn't report up to the president with prosecutorial ability, that has the ability to go to investigate and, if necessary, prosecute any public office official, including the president.
Nancy in Woodland, California, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why Trump is being indulged with this third recount in Georgia. It's been counted by hand, been counted by machine. That should be it. And I'm concerned about them being able to hack this recount going on now, since it is being done by machine, and just stretching this thing out, trying to go to other states and do this. It's just ridiculous that he's being allowed to do this.
I agree with you completely. I think their strategy, I don't think it's that they're going to hack it, though I'm sure some would try. I think what their strategy is very deliberate, and that is they want, through hook or crook, through frivolous lawsuits, try to delay the certification beyond the safe harbor date, beyond the December 8th date. And if they can delay the certification in just 3 of these states, then the hope is that it kicks it to Congress. And it seems to me that that's really their strategy, which is why they don't care that some of these cases are frivolous or some of the recounts have no chance of success. It's irrelevant to their strategy. Their strategy is just delay, delay, delay.
Jeff in Santa Fe, New Mexico, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you.
I was wondering if it would be possible to open hearings in Congress to investigate the Trump administration for blocking the transfer of power and the breach of duty, really, and all the damage that it's causing.
Jeff, we are currently focused on having the GSA administrator come before the Oversight Committee, explain what her obligations is, and effectuate a smooth transition. And I think that the Congress, until January 20th, should be focused on whatever we can do to help Biden and Vice President-elect Harris get the information they need and their teams get access to what they need. Once we are past the swearing-in date, then I think retroactively these oversight committees can investigate why the transition was not correctly handled, what we need to do to make sure that never happens again, and, of course, refer to the Justice Department for any criminal conduct that may have taken place.
Yeah, Congressman, we're just a minute from the break. The Emily, I'm forgetting her last name, the woman who is, the GSA administrator, the 100, I say that again, Sean? Murphy, Emily Murphy, thank you. She's making $180,000 a year on the taxpayer dime, and she already went before Congress, and her agency has oversight over the FBI building, and they were going to move out to Virginia and build a new building in Virginia. And Trump put the kibosh on that because that would have meant that prime real estate right across the street and a half a block down from the Trump Hotel would probably have a new Marriott in it, which would compete with him. She went before Congress and she lied about that. It's been demonstrated that she lied about it. She's never been held to account for it. She's a Trumpista. I mean, what's going to happen with this?
Well, you're right. I mean, and there was some resistance initially about even calling her to Congress or asking her to comply, and there was this hope that Republicans would go talk to them and talk them into common sense. That hasn't happened. So now the Oversight Committee has written her a letter. They're asking for responses, and she will be hauled in front of the committee if things don't start moving very quickly.
I would love to see Katie Porter grilling her. That would be like pay TV. Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls for a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Khanna of California. And welcome back. Jordy in Seattle, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, thank you. I think Democrats should start using a technique that the Republicans have been using with consistent talking points across Congress people. You acknowledged today to a caller that defunding is a great idea. If you don't take to use that like the Republicans have used it, we should talk about how the Commons is being defunded through tax cuts. If corporate welfare and defunding were used consistently to inform the public, first maybe from the bully pulpit by the president or vice president, and then consistently in interviews, perhaps we could get the word across. Eisenhower used a speech to tell the public how many schools a bomber is worth, and if a word like that starts, say, corporate welfare, spoken first from the bully pulpit and then followed up, I think repeating the message would be good. So, agreeing that defunding is a good idea, but it is nice. But if you don't carry that good idea and share it with your compatriots, then what good is it?
This is very well said. I mean, I agree with you that we have to be consistent and vocal in getting our message out there on media. I do think the fact now that we will have the White House, it gives a much bigger bully pulpit. You already see the stories this week are all about Biden's cabinet picks, and it's not all Trump, Trump, Trump all the time. And so hopefully with the White House, those of us in the House will have a bigger voice in getting the message out and talking about what the Republicans really want to do with corporate welfare and defunding services and protections for Americans.
Jeff in Portland, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, guys. Thank you both for all you do. Congressman Khanna, concerning Trump's ongoing coup attempt and seeking to upend democracy, I misspoke to Tom last week. The Republican Party's complicity, is just absolute and unprecedented. And this Emily Murphy that you guys were just talking about, her job is to turn over the money, resources, and information to the apparent winner. The language is very clear. Biden has been the apparent winner for over 2.5 weeks. Congressman Khanna, shouldn't Emily Murphy be facing criminal charges holding up this peaceful transition during a raging pandemic?
Well, I think that she needs to be asked to explain what she's doing and what her rationale is, which is why first step is to answer the committee's questions, to appear before the committee, and to be given an explanation for what she's doing. But it is outrageous that Biden hasn't been given the information he needs, and we need Republicans. We need Republican senators, Republican members of Congress to speak up.
Yeah, it seems like that wall is starting tentatively to break. I'm guessing by the end of this week, I hope. Anyhow, we'll be back with... Yeah, thank you. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Congressman Khanna in just a moment. Stick around. You can check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Khanna, R-O is how you spell it. We'll be right back. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Did you know that 100 police officers, and the last year we have statistics for is 2017, so we'll use that. 100 police officers were killed by firearms during that year. Now, some were suicides, some were accidental shootings. A few of them were bad guys killing cops. 100. 1,000 of our soldiers all around the world were shot dead in 2017. 1,000. A little more dangerous, apparently, to be a soldier than to be a cop. But apparently, the most dangerous position in the United States is not being a police officer on the front lines. It's not being a soldier on the front lines of combat. It's being a child. School-aged children killed by firearms in 2017, 2,462 of them. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com about this situation and what we can do about it. You can check it out there. Welcome back, Congressman Khanna, taking your calls for the hour. Neil in Gloucester, Mass. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, I was wondering why the communication isn't a little bit more strident on the virus. If in Atlanta 10 people got shot at a Walmart, it would be front page news. But if 1,000 people died in the United States, actually 2,000 over the weekend on one day, can't the communication be better? Like having 1,000 people shot by a machine gun, okay? Seeing the blood on the street from the people that died from the virus, but we dance around it. We don't even have like a counter on the television that records every time somebody dies while you're talking to them. So that's where I'm coming from. Is it's not explicit that the Trump virus is killing people. It's devastating, and we're not really communicating it. We're having nice little,
Thank you, Neil. Neil, let's get the answer here.
Neil, I agree with you that there's a total desensitization to the loss of life. I mean, it is appalling, shocking, horrifying that 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people are dying every day, and we have become numb, immune to it in a way that's very sad. So we need to speak about it more clearly and make sure people realize how much of a risk they're still out there and how much of a challenge this is going to be for the next year, even assuming the vaccines are as effective as the studies indicate.
Chris in Jamestown, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you, Tom, and Representative Khan. I just have a thought, like in 4 years when we have our next presidential election, if we had the candidates, whoever they are, whether it's Democrat, Republican, or Independent, to sign a consent that they're willing to be investigated from their taxes to any other potential things that might affect their candidacy prior.
A consent to disclose the taxes, you mean as a precondition to run?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer. I think that needs to be a law so that you can't have someone like Trump exploit those loopholes ever again.
Kathy in Salisbury, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you both very much. Mr. O'Connor, I have a question about a coronavirus hospital and rehab being built now. We do so many things, and we build walls, and we've got a lot of people dying. I mean, this disease is real bad, but we haven't even addressed where we're going to put these people to help them. Can you present that to I guess it's Mitch McConnell? Thank you.
Kathy, I hear you, and I think it's just so devastating. You have people who are dying without their family there, calling for their family, and not being able to see them. You have families not being able to grieve because there's no process for being able to have funerals, not being able to know where to bury the dead, and a total lack of planning, not just in fighting the disease, but also in understanding how to cope and grieve with loss. I do think President Biden is uniquely suited to help the country think through that and heal, both because of his own life story and with loss and his evident decency and empathy. And my hope is that his administration will really make that a priority.
1 minute to the end of the hour. Raj in Detroit. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. And hello, Tom. I got one short thing to say. Anytime you're after a crook, you follow the money. Why didn't Mueller follow the money? Why didn't the Senate or the Congress follow this man's trail of unaccounted for money? And
going after Trump's money.
Roger, you're right. I mean, that is the issue with Trump. It's why I think he's hid his tax returns. It's why he's resisted disclosures on his finances. And it will all come out. The New York state cases are going to make sure it comes out. And he has a lot of legal challenges when he leaves. I think that's one of the reasons that he's fought so hard to keep the position. He knows what faces him and his business the day he's out of the office.
Congressman, final thoughts for the week?
Well, I hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving under the circumstances. I'm thinking about the people who've had just such a tough year, a year where they've either lost someone, they have lost their job, they are having a tough time putting food on the table, and my thoughts and prayers are with them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Khanna. It's always great having you with us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks. We'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft. Not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross by a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today in our Conversations with Great Minds, we have Dr. Jack Bratich with us. He's the Associate Professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at the School of Communication and Information with Rutgers University. Rutgers.academia.edu is that website. His Twitter handle is jbratich, B-R-A-T-I-C-H. And Dr. Jack Bratich, welcome to the program, and thanks so much for dropping by today and doing an hour-long deep dive with us about this whole QAnon cult and you know where it came from, where it's going, what it is, all that kind of thing. Can we start out by defining terms? What is a cult and what is QAnon?
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, well, a cult, I'm not an expert in cults. I tend to write about conspiracy theories, but I will say that, you know, the difference between a cult and a religious movement is often the way that the kind of the fervor or the fanaticism that's attached to either a single figure or a way of believing in the world. That's how they often get called. But, you know, I would say that, you know, I think QAnon, and maybe we'll get into this, somewhere, you know, shades between a cult and something that's fairly standard in a kind of religious movement, too. But it's certainly the devotion of the adherents is really at the core of a lot of that for a cult.
Would it be reasonable to just...
Sorry, go ahead.
Just by way of coming up with a layman's definition here, that a religious institution generally has like the Catholic Church, or the mainstream Methodist, Judaism, Islam, that the basic purpose is to help individuals achieve some sort of union with God or some sort of higher understanding of life. That it's focused on the people who are members of it, as opposed to in a cult, the focus tends to be on leadership, sometimes secret leadership, and the leadership issues commands about how one must think and how one must view the world. And I realize that religions have catechisms too, but that this is shifting the power and the focus from the people to the cult leaders. You think that's a reasonable starting point?
I think that's reasonable. I think how focused it is on the leader actually makes a huge difference. And I think the way that people find their purpose in life only through the commands of a leader, I think, can really be the core difference between a cult and a religious movement.
So to QAnon, where are they on this spectrum, and what are they all about?
Well, it's interesting, given what we just said. It's interesting because there is no leader in the sense of the classic cults. I mean, there is this mysterious figure that goes by the name, or many people go by the name of Q, that have created and dropped clues onto the internet that then people have picked up and interpreted and kind of formed a movement around it. I think of QAnon as a kind of internet-enabled, religiously based or spiritually based Trumpist social movement, born of the internet, but really born out of Trumpism too, with a very kind of reactionary spiritual dimension to it.
Can we break that down a little bit? What is the spiritual part of it? What is the Trumpist part of it? And who is Q?
Right. Well, I mean, there are entire podcasts devoted to trying to figure out who Q is, and so I think a lot of people are really trying to figure out who that might be. What I would focus on is sort of breaking it down more into the kind of political and then the religious side of it. So let's just say that, we'll start with, it appeared on an image board called 4chan in October 2017. This figure Q starts creating these mysterious posts, right, including the prediction early on that Hillary Rodham Clinton would be arrested soon, right? So you can already hear in that the kind of Trumpist lock her up chants that are now finding new expression in this internet arena, and all that a Republican obsession with the Obama administration even after Trump got into office, right? So part of this is coming out of an already existing culture of fixation on Democrats and locking them up, right? So about a few months later, in August 2018, QAnon believers start showing up at Trump rallies, right, and with images of Q and Q on their shirts, and they start kind of forming more of a something resembling a community, if not an organization. So I think one of the interesting things, I've never heard of a QAnon adherent who's also a Biden supporter. Maybe there's somebody out there that could really change my opinion on that, but for the most part, the Venn diagram of those two communities overlaps quite strongly. So that's part of the kind of Trumpism that is, that the Democrats, we can get into the core beliefs of QAnon in a second, but really the Democrats are more than just an adversary politically. They are also a spiritual enemy because of the things they are alleged to be doing. So that's the kind of more Trumpist side of it. Get into the religious side or the spiritual side, right? So the core kind of belief in QAnon, and there are a variety of conspiracy theories that can be attached to this, but the core belief is this: there's an elite cabal that has corrupted America. That cabal is in league with Satan. There's a small secret group in the U.S. military that's ready to expose and fight that cabal, and Donald Trump gives them their blessing and might be the kind of leader of that fight. but that cabal is basically housed inside the Democratic Party. Other theories that people might be familiar with can be hung on this thread, things like Pizzagate, coronavirus is fake, vaccinations do more harm than good, JFK Jr. is alive, and even broader ones. So it's the general template is that there's a kind of new world order, and that the current expression of that new world order is these kind of bloodthirsty Democrats and figures in the Democratic Party who, among other things, sacrifice children, drink their blood, eat their hormones, traffic in sex trafficking with children, as well as pedophilia networks. So that's just a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah, back in the early 20th century, the Tsar of Russia Tsar Nicholas II commissioned his Secret Service to come up with basically something that would justify taking the wealth of Jewish bankers and Jews in general in Russia. And they came up with this Protocols of the Elders of Zion, this phony baloney thing that Hitler hung a lot of his stuff on. And one of the teachings of that, essentially, I'm not sure it was in Protocols specifically, but it was this idea of blood libel, that Jews would drain blood from non-Jewish children and use that for matzah, for the bread that they eat during the high holy holidays. We have about 40 seconds till we're going to hit a break here. Has that just been transplanted over into the QAnon conspiracy?
Yes, I mean, anti-Semitism is at the core of a lot of this, right? Between the blood libel, the fixation on certain families that rule the world, primarily the Rothschilds for them, as well as the kinds of more kind of like secular anti-Semitism around George Soros funding all of Antifa and BLM, right? So the kind of fixation on Jewish control is at the center of a lot of the narrative of QAnon, for sure.
This is just a fascinating thing. We're talking with Dr. Jack Bratich. He is the Associate Professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, School of Communications Information at Rutgers University, an expert on QAnon. Bratich is his Twitter handle. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Doing a deep dive into wacky right-wing conspiracy theories. More right after this. So, Dr. Bratich, which came first, the anti-Semitism or the or some specific component of the Q conspiracy theory? Well, actually, for that matter, the blood of the children thing. They never, at least I've never seen a direct reference in any of the QAnon stuff to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So how does anti-Semitism fit into this? And where did it get injected into this?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that every QAnon adherent is either aware or cognizant or necessarily as an anti-Semite themselves. However, the kind of structure of the narrative is built into it, and I mean, it came in, I think, a little later than the original interest in this, which I mean, it was more of a kind of game almost. That, let's figure out who this deep state is and who's going to be fighting the deep state. It was kind of like a secular thing, really, at the beginning, where Q would post these things about, an upcoming mass arrest that was going to happen. And so I think early on it was more of a kind of, more kind of, again, earthly, grounded political game of conspiracy that then began to broaden out more. And got to have these kind of more salacious and also anti-Semitic historical frames attached to them around that. So I think, but it's mutated over time a bit. But really, at the core of it now is the kind of a desire to really almost fight and wage what I think is going to be, in their minds, a kind of spiritual war. I mean, they talk about it this way. But the kind of structure of it involves almost three you almost say like biblical dimensions. One is the Great Awakening. They believe that, like, for some years now, that people are undergoing a Great Awakening to these horrible crimes that have been going on. And then they say what's going to happen because of this Great Awakening is going to be a mass movement to support basically a military coup that they call the Storm. Very grand metaphor there. And that we need to trust in this execution of this coup, which they call the plan. Right? So you trust in the plan. And that's what also makes it seem more than just a kind of war game that people were trying to figure out, like, how is Trump going to fight off these deep state figures? But when they put it into this really grand and epic kind of story, then we start seeing more of even the kind of religious inflection to it.
I've read op-eds or articles by people who are deep into gamer culture suggesting that perhaps this literally started out as kind of an online game, a SimCity kind of thing. Let's create a reality here. Let's imagine it. Do you think there's truth to that?
I mean, when I first heard about it, it reminded me of those, kind of like augmented reality games that used to be more
Dungeons
for like
and Dragons
promotions. Yeah, exactly. That, and then, they started using the internet, meaning like so promotional things for like Steven Spielberg's film AI. Use the kind of way to do this kind of detective game or online, and it's a way to kind of be a teaser or a trailer for the film. And so I thought, well, what is this film that's about to emerge that people are now playing this kind of investigation game for? But so it could have those origins. It could have started as a prank.
Hang on just a second. We'll be right back. Sure. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. So John Kasich was recently on CNN talking about how Democrats need to be listening to rural America, words to that effect. No, I think Democrats need to be talking to rural America and reminding rural America that it was a Democratic president that got them Social Security. It was a Democratic president that brought electricity to rural America, the RTA through, or the REA rather through the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was the Democratic Party who brought phones to rural America. It was the Democratic Party that brought Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and public education to rural America, subsidized all those things. Democrats don't need to be listening to rural America. They need to be talking to rural America. There's over 1,500 right-wing radio stations in rural America talking smack all the time, 24/7, and none in rural America carrying a progressive message. That's what Democrats need to be paying attention to. You can check out our new video on this over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Dr. Jack Bratich is with us about the QAnon conspiracy. Dr. Bratich, you were saying that there are basically three modules, as it were, three pieces in sequence that, by and large, make up the Q conspiracy and Q movement. The Great Awakening, the Storm, and the Plan. Let's walk through those one at a time, if that's all right with you. Tell us about the Great Awakening.
So the Great Awakening is almost like, the moment of revelations. That what's going to happen is that people who have been, blindfolded throughout their lives are going to finally see the truth of how power works, and to see the way that this cabal has, run things for so long, and how now this is the moment where people need to rise up against it, right? So that was the first phase. And I think this phase is kind of, it hit its peak, I would say, during the lockdown and the sort of quarantine times of COVID, where there was a real spike in March and April, yes. When people were at home, Many of them were worried about the future. Many of them were lonely, and they started going online and finding this world that was telling them that how things really were, and giving them some meaning and purpose, and community, right? And so I think the Great Awakening was that kind of moment where revelations were beginning to be experienced in this way, and now and there was a deliberate effort to try to educate others, what they called red pilling. Other people, red pill your friends, red pill your family, right? Which is to kind of, proselytize, convince, persuade, some old-fashioned kind of ways of getting people to be on board with your own belief system, and so that really kind of spiked in the spring and summer of 2020. So that was a great awakening.
So. Yeah. So with regard to that, the extent to which Q Anon has provided people with a sense of community, number one, a sense of purpose and meaning, number two, and outlets for activism, number three. I remember when I was a kid, when I was like, literally, 12, 13 years old, 11 years old. My dad taking me to Republican Party meetings in Lansing, Michigan, where we grew up, and that were in the neighborhood. I mean, we went over to another guy's house, and there was like 6 or 8 people. All of them were men who were like, real active in the Republican Party. And then there were a few of their wives who'd come along, and it would kind of be more of a social time. I mean, keep in mind, this was the late 1950s, early 1960s, and I'm sure the same thing was happening on the Democratic side. I'd have to ask my wife. Her father was the Assistant Attorney General for the state of Michigan. An appointed. He was a Democrat, political appointee. But the political party, the Republican Party, was giving my dad a sense of community and meaning and purpose, and an outlet to be an activist, making him feel like he could actually change the world. And I felt that through him. I mean, we went door to door in 1964 when I was 13 years old for Barry Goldwater, as part of that. To what extent do you think that the failure of political parties to do this kind of grassroots stuff and just to throw everything from the top down with $1 billion worth of television advertising has created an opening for something like this?
Oh, I think that's right on. I think the parties, I think, a way that much of U.S. society has created a sense of disenchantment and alienation. And so people figuring out where their purpose could be, that could be aligned with some values, which could find also community, which could create a better world, has been, broken up, as people have been distracted, people have been overworked. I mean, there are many things that contribute to the inability to be able to sort of form that kind of world and that kind of life. So I think, that's often been the case, that other belief systems can show up in those moments that might even be anti-democratic in that sense. They're not part of the political system. In fact, they see maybe the entire political system as being part of the problem, and so they look to a higher purpose than the ones they would find in their in their everyday lives or in their civic duties or in their community relationships. I think that's parties are certainly one element of that has created a lot of anxiety and alienation in the world.
And perhaps the collapse of church going in America?
I mean, I'm sure that too. The question is depending on what those belief systems in those churches did. I think that.
What are the social forces that are driving it?
Exactly. I mean, I think people don't always need churches for that, but yes, they can find purpose in life.
We're talking with Dr. Jack Bratich, who has done a deep dive on Q Anon with Rutgers University. We just talked about the Great Awakening. We'll talk about the storm and the plan right after this break here at the bottom of the hour. Stick around. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In our conversations with the great minds today, Dr. Jack Bratich, Associate Professor in the Department of Journalism and Media Studies at Rutgers, is with us. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Health Justice Now, Single Payer and What Comes Next by Timothy Faust. And this is from the introduction. A secret scream rings through America. It rings down the sterile fluorescent hallways of our hospitals. It rings over our rural towns and our native reservations. It rings through our prisons, the bellies of our great cities. It rings in our farms and our fields, our streets and our sewers, our bodies and our blood. And we are cursed to never hear it clearly until at last we realize it has been our own mouth screaming and we are lost. A child born today inherits in that secret a new American squalor, the skeletal remains of the American cities, the bleached bones of the American suburbs. This secret is a birthright of continual exploitation, pumped for labor and drained of cash and then punished for the resulting suffering. Punished for being hungry, punished for being sick, punished for being pregnant, punished for being poor, punished for being black or brown, punished for being queer, for being unlucky, for being. At the base of that suffering is lodged a little truth, like a knot in the stomach. In America, sickness makes you poor, and poorness makes you sick. This is a book about that relationship and why it happens, and why it's unnecessary, and what we can do to fix it. The cosmic whirling of God's great slot machine has not determined that some people are fated to suffer while others flourish. We have the resources to take care of everyone, and yet we refuse to do so. Your medical debt and medical bills are unnecessary, but we have chosen to make them necessary. These are structural problems with structural causes, and many of them share roots in how we pay for health care. This is a book about health care and health finance. They are different. Healthcare is anything that helps you stay safe and healthy. It's a kind of freedom from and within your own body. Health finance is the method by which we as a country pay for that freedom and by which we decide who gets to have it and who doesn't. Healthcare is more than what happens to you in the hospital. Healthcare is whether your home makes you sick, or your food makes you sick, or your environment makes you sick, or whether you have enough money to afford the things that keep you healthy. In America, the structure of corporate health care has convinced us that some people deserve health care and some people don't. This is a book about that corporate health finance, about private insurance and private insurers. For half a century, they've convinced us that they're the only things that keep us or could ever keep us from the utter financial ruination of illness. They've sold us different inadequate insurance plans and persuaded us that this is a form of great liberty, while chipping away at our freedoms for profit and holding our bodies and our children's bodies hostage. This is a book about single-payer health care, a health finance model in which we pool our abundant collective resources to provide health care to all people. It is a common model across the world. As we will discuss in this book, we have the potential not just to enact a single-payer program in America, but to build the greatest health care program among any so-called developed democracy. Here is my profession of faith. I believe beyond any doubt that single payer is demonstrably sound and imminently feasible. I believe a properly ambitious and well-structured single-payer program will do more than any other American social program of this generation to soothe the burns, to resuscitate the spirit, to nourish the moral will of the American people. I believe it will loosen the loathsome manacles of American health finance, an exploitative institution that profits by plundering from us our own bodily autonomy, and that anchors a larger exploitation that holds those whom we love as captive leverage to guarantee our servitude to abusive employers or domestic partners, to those who seek to dominate us both in the office and in the hospital. I believe this nation owes its people, whose labor has created its rich banquet, the safety and agency of health care. I believe this health care is greater in scope than that which happens upon an operating table. I believe that housing, food, income, and more, the components of basic human dignity, are health care. And I believe our work is that of striving toward justice for all people. And I therefore believe, I have to believe, that single-payer health care is our moral imperative. Single-payer is our tool. Single-payer is our weapon. Single-payer is our first step. But single-payer on its own is not the goal. This book is about health justice. Healthcare is personal, so I want to start this book personally by introducing two friends of mine, Steve Way and Kyle Kolick. They're two guys about my age, I'm 30, who live in North New Jersey. They're sweet, gentle people, and probably the most charismatic pair of friends I've met in my entire life. They make me laugh until my face hurts, and we like watching pro wrestling together. They're also being utterly broken by our American healthcare system, and it's keeping them from living their lives. Steve has muscular dystrophy. The muscle and tissues that hold his body together are eating themselves. He's doing pretty good, all things considered. He beat his original life expectancy of 18 and now probably has a long life ahead of him. Steve needs a wheelchair to move and a ventilator to help him breathe. The book, Health Justice Now, Timothy Faust. I'm speaking at the Bioneers 2020 conference. It's running December 5th and 6th and 12th and 13th. My keynote is how all life is organized around democracy. Tickets are available at Bioneers.org, and there's a 20% discount with the code TOM, T-H-O-M. Our video for the day are for Thom Hartmann Program supporters. It's available over at TomHartmann.com. Is talking about how the Donald Trump presidency has been fundamentally destructive, not just to the United States, not just to our political norms, not just to our body politic, not just to the institutions of the presidency and our governance in general. His disrespect of judges, his disrespect of Congress, his pushing the boundaries of what the Article 2, an Article 2 office can do. But it's also destructive around the world because of the things that he's not doing, that aren't getting attended to. We've got major parts of the world that are spiraling into chaos that could, several of them could trigger World War III. And instead, he's sitting there live tweeting Fox News, literally every morning and every evening. Check it out. It's available over at TomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Dr. Jack Bratich is with us. He is associate professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, the School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University, and has researched and written extensively about QAnon. His Twitter handle, jbratich, J-B-R-A-T-I-C-H. Dr. Bratich, we've talked about the origins of QAnon, where it started with this message board, and I guess we haven't gotten into speculating about if there's more than one Q and who Q might be and what the motives are. That would be, in fact, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And then after that, I want to get into, we talked about the Great Awakening before the break. I want to get into the storm and the plan. So, but just to start out, what's the best information or the best guess that we have on who is Q or who is behind this, or even if there is one single person who's driving this train?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the endless speculation, but I think the best sort of recent investigations into this are involve the person, I've forgotten his name, Jim Watkins, I believe is his name, who runs 8kun, which was the shift away from 8chan, one of these image boards where Q appears and makes his drops, or their drops, I should say, their drops.
Is this the guy in the Philippines?
Yes, that's him. Is that basically one of his former colleagues and collaborators, they had a split. His name is Brennan, last name is Brennan, has come out and basically said he thinks, and he has pretty solid evidence for the speculation at least, that the only person who could control the codes, the trip codes they're called, right, to be able to post under Q is Watkins. And the way that it seems like there was a moment where it became, when they split, he could tell that basically there was a lot going on with Q that seemed to be coming from the owners, basically, or the managers of the platform itself. That's the sort of latest, and that's a kind of insider tale about it too, right? About who's sort of operating it now. Whether there were a number of people who were doing it at the beginning, I think what's happened now is that, whoever is involved in it is quite aware of their power over a large network of people, many of whom have their own YouTube, or they used to have YouTube channels, but they have their own channels and accounts that interpret all of these Q codes. So there's a whole range of influencers who are kind of embedded in this. It's not just a bunch of followers, but it's just, it's a number of these intermediaries, too, that I think are worth paying attention to as how a movement is built, too. So it's beyond Q, the individual. Now it's mostly these influencers who are shaping the movement.
So there were, in the late part of the 19th and the early years of the 20th century, there were a number of religious figures who were talking about, well, basically that was the time period. There's about a 40, 50-year period there where the idea of the rapture came about. It literally hadn't been part of Christianity before that in its modern form, where people will go up into the air and all this kind of stuff. And the and the sequence of things that have to occur before that kind of got formalized in 1974 with I'm forgetting his name, the guy who wrote the book, but the late great Planet Earth, Hal Lindsey, and but since that kind of foundational point, and there were some foundational people, Ellen White with the Seventh-day Adventists, and I forget the name of the guy who started the Jehovah's Witnesses, but there were all kinds of branches that came out of that. But over the years, what has happened is that they've split into 100 different. So now you've got this televangelist with this sales pitch, the prosperity gospel, and then there's this televangelist with the speaking in tongues gospel, and there's and so like now are these like the influencers? I mean, is that sort of a org chart evolution kind of thing, sort of parallel to what's happening with Q? And if so, or even not if so, how many people are involved right now? How many people do you think are, quote, followers or curious, participants with Q Anon versus how many are influencers and like that?
Right. I mean, that's a great question. It's hard to track, right? But you can track, I guess, through the number of, views and likes, and it seems to be in the millions, at least in terms of people who are QAnon curious enough to watch some of these more like the bigger media channels within that community. I would say there are probably like 10 to a dozen of these main figures that people tend to gravitate towards, who some of them have daily news shows where they're interpreting the news. They're trying to relay it to the QAnon community. It's not always about just interpreting Q's drops, is what they call them, right? The clues they leave out, but also just decoding the news. And since you mentioned these different, historical reference points, I think one that I find fascinating that I don't think people bring up so much, because it's also related to media and media forms, and that's Pat Robertson and the 700 Club and the Christian Broadcasting Network, insofar as he was able to understand the power of the medium and to bring his, sort of apocalyptic Christian viewpoint, conservative viewpoint, not just as a kind of way to get a message out, but he created and bought an entire cable network, had, programming during the day, and then every day he would also have the 700 Club, which would interpret the news for people. He also wrote a book called The New World Order, right? He's really tied into some of this kind of long-standing thing, but I think he's one of these precursors insofar as he also understood the power of the medium at the time. At that point, Christian Broadcasting Network, the popularity of cable, the early days of cable TV.
Right. He also made $1 billion. Pat Robertson did. Is there evidence that there are people? I'm assuming probably some of these influencers are starting to get pretty good-sized checks from YouTube or whatever. I mean, is there evidence that there's a financial motive now, like we're seeing, fairly obviously among some of the so-called Christian televangelists, and now we see with these scandals around Jerry Falwell Jr. and Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, that they were just hustlers. They're just in it for the bucks.
Yeah, I think there are a number of folks. I mean, I mean, this is also like, when something like this emerges, huckster capitalism, comes into play, and people want to come in and make a buck. I think that's going to be standard. I think some of the more major ones are true believers, though, or at least they're spending a lot of effort, and it's hard to tell what kinds of monetary gain they're getting, especially now that so many of them have been demonetized from places like YouTube or deplatformed from some of the major tech platforms. So I think, but there's always going to be, hustlers and grifters involved in this, and the fact that it's hard to tell the difference is precisely part of the issue.
So we have 2 minutes to the break. Tell us about the storm.
Okay, the storm, because I also do want to get to the plan, because that's more about the election, I think. Mm-hmm. The storm is the belief that there's going to be a kind of massive arrest, mostly by loyalists to Donald Trump, mostly in the military, who are going to unseal all of these alleged indictments, at least 200,000 indictments, which will, definitively prove these kind of criminal acts by Democrats. Right. So the belief is that the moment that happens, and we don't know when that moment's going to happen. That's part of it, right? But they're waiting maybe for Trump himself to announce that the storm has arrived. They made a big deal.
It's like the rapture.
A year or so. It's very much the rapture. Absolutely. This is very much that kind of millennial and apocalyptic version of Christianity here. Yeah, for sure. And it's going to be a massive thing, and the world will become a better place. That's the other part. It is this kind of utopic moment. The good will finally triumph over evil, and that's the storm. And right now we're in the calm before the storm. That's one of their ongoing mantras, right? And now it's the calm before the storm.
So have they appropriated Christian mythology in this regard, or is this something that is just archetypal? I mean, is it part of lots and lots of religions? I'm guessing it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it's archetypal. Some of them have specifically talked about being saved. So I think some of them have actually gone through a conversion process. Some of them are already evangelical Christians as well. So I think it's both deep-seated but also very specific to now.
Remarkable stuff. We're talking with Dr. Jack Bratich, Associate Professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University. Jay Bratich is his Twitter handle. And we will be back. We're going to get into the plan in about 4 minutes. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're doing a deep dive on QAnon today. Stick around. We'll be right back. So, Dr. Bratich, comparing QAnon to some of the aspects of Christianity, and I use that as an example because I think most Americans have some level of familiarity with it. With some of the component organizations within Christianity that you could arguably call a cult. And I'm thinking of some of these televangelists, and I mean, obviously Jim Jones, he was a Christian preacher. There's no shortage of scandal and stuff around them. Is there, if you look at these Christian cults, these religious cults, typically they emerge based on a foundational theology for which there's a broad consensus. Just the basic tenets of Christianity. And then the leader purports to have a special understanding or secret knowledge and imparts that to his followers. And then the followers basically detach themselves from the mainstream of Christianity and realign their personal identity and spiritual identity with this new cult. And cling tenaciously to it, even when people discover that Kenneth Copeland, has a private jet, and or Jim Baker has a mistress, or fill in the blanks, right? but there's still that sense of identity. To what has QAnon missed any of the pieces here? Because it kind of looks like you could just construct this as a flow chart and say you could do this with anything. You know, you could do this around politics, you could do this around religion, you could do this around worshiping nature. Whatever. Is QAnon that conventional?
Yeah, it kind of is insofar as the worldview is not that elaborate. I mean, there aren't these great texts, there aren't these great writings, and what there are these little clues in coded language. There's some videos, right? Video documentaries, and there are very few kind of like core things that people even watch or read together to even have that kind of common purpose. It's really decentralized. It's really a distributed movement, which makes it fascinating in that way. So it's hard to tell like what everyone's kind of investment is in this, spiritually speaking, right? I mean, I will say just briefly that one of the interesting recent things that has caused some controversy is the way that QAnon has infiltrated or moved into the yoga community and the health and wellness community around yoga and spirituality. So it's not just it's been a big controversy in that community about how much it has moved in. So that's another story as well, the different kinds of transcendence and spirituality that can be sort of appropriated or moved in. So it's not always the most conventional kinds that we might think of.
That's remarkable. Are there other subcultures that it's popping up in?
I just read something that QAnon is making moves into sex worker communities. I mean, every community can be sort of touched by QAnon. I mean, nothing is really immune unless you're deliberately trying to be aware of it.
Yeah, particularly because it's essentially a secular religion, so you don't have to sacrifice previous beliefs. It's remarkable. Okay, we're going to get into the plan right after this. Dr. Jack Bratich is with us. Stick around. So our special members-only video, as it were, over at ThomHartmann.com this week is about Republicans who claim that they're, particularly those who stay inside the Trump administration, who claim, like this anonymous guy who wrote the column a year or so ago saying, don't worry, we're keeping things safe. We're thwarting Donald Trump's worst impulses. Right, these Republicans who claim that they are staying in the party and staying in the administration, just to hold down the fort. I'm sorry, you guys are not patriots. You're not quiet heroes. You are stooges, toadies, complicit, cowards, traitors, quislings, co-conspirators. Rick Wilson went off on a tweet about this, and I completely agree with it, and added a few thoughts of my own as well. So if you'd like to check it out, it's over at ThomHartmann.com. It's our members-only video for the week. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Jack Bratich of Rutgers University about QAnon, the whole QAnon conspiracy thing. Dr. Bratich, we've got about, I guess, 7 or 8 minutes here until we hit the end of the hour. We've talked about the Great Awakening. We've talked about who Q is or might be, who the followers are, and how they get acquired. We were just talking about how this QAnon conspiracy movement, religion, is starting to infiltrate the yoga community, the health and wellness community, even the sex worker community. It could pop up in any secular or even religious subculture in the United States. But what's the plan? What's the final piece of the QAnon conspiracy theory or movement or whatever you want to call it?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is where it becomes a kind of faith-based movement, because the plan is something you can't know. You just have to trust that it's happening, right? This is where the deep faith comes in, even some of the kind of predecessors that you've mentioned, right? The ones who are making prophecies and predictions that don't come true, right? Instead, wrong predictions, unexpected obstacles are all seen as part of the plan. We just don't know it yet, right? Speaking as pretend I'm a Q Anon. We can't know the plan. We can only trust the plan. That's their phrase, trust the plan. So what that means then is that, failures become just one more move in the plan. And guess who knows what the plan really is? They believe that Donald Trump is the genius that he is. They call him a 5D chess master, right? He knows the plan. And so all these things that are happening right now around the election are actually part of the plan, even though we might not know the details of it. So this is why, QAnon has also been very active after November 3rd this year, after the election. So I think they have a significant role to play in this post-election time and time of chaos to link it to other things you were talking about in this show and other shows around, a potential coup attempt or attempt at blocking the election results. And so I think one of that plan, one of the things that QAnon is doing, I've been watching some of these, the kind of videos and podcasts, listening to the podcast recently, is they're trying to provide comfort and support to the followers right now. This is why they say trust the plan. Take it easy. It's okay. It's happening. It's a salve in that way. It's part of salvation, right? Mm-hmm. It's a moment of recuperating. It's going to be okay. Things are being handled. Don't get worried, right? Stay home with your families. Enjoy life for a bit. Things are going to work out for Trump, right? So I think for me, this fits into a different narrative than what people are saying, like, oh, Republicans are going through the processes, the 5 stages of grief. I'm not sure if QAnon is. I think QAnon might be going through something else, which is the feeling of what it meant to be there on Holy Saturday, after Good Friday and before the resurrection. There's this day where it's neither one, right? And so I think many of them are in this kind of interminable moment of waiting for the grand revelation to happen. So that's one of the things.
It reminds me of Ellen White with the Seventh-day Adventists. But Pat Robertson stepped into that void with Christianity and made $1 billion. Do you think that this is Donald Trump's next big grift? That after he leaves office, he's going to hint that he actually is who Q says he is, and he's going to start monetizing this base?
I think it would be very shortly. I believe that he will at least acknowledge QAnon more directly and say either that he's been aware of everything and he's been behind the scenes, or at least say that he's a major supporter. And that will be a sign for the supporters of something that they've been looking forward to, right? A major moment of proper, actual, direct recognition. Right now, I think what they're acting on his behalf, whether direct or not, is to create a kind of static and a kind of interference right now, to flood the zone with all kinds of details as a way to do what he, I think, is trying to do right now, which is, you mentioned before, it's not a classic coup in the same sense. It's a way of blocking things from happening. It's a way of blocking certification and ratification. How do you block those? You create uncertainty. And if you can get enough static, and QAnon is producing a lot of static around the election results and election counting, then that's the thing that might end up getting them what they've been wishing for, which is the victory.
That's remarkable, and it just seems like it's custom made for Donald Trump's next big grift. I mean, he's extracted that we know of, at least $130 million from the U.S. taxpayer just by having Secret Service stay at his hotels and things like that. It was just amazing. Dr. Jack Bratich, thanks so much for dropping by today. It's been great talking with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thank you. Dr. Jack Bratich, he's the Associate Professor at the Department of Journalism and Media Studies, School of Communication and Information at Rutgers University. J. Bratich is his Twitter handle. And thanks for being with us today. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.